Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into the world of Genshin Impact characters, and let me tell you, this is a tricky one. With the game's roster constantly growing, it can be hard to decide which characters are worth pulling for, especially when Primogems are so hard to come by. But here's the thing, tier lists for Genshin Impact? Yeah, they're kind of a joke. There's no perfect formula to rank characters because they all have their strengths, and what works for one player might not work for another. So instead of going full-on power level mode, I'm going to break it down by team flexibility, overall utility, and how popular these characters are in the meta. Now, keep in mind that this isn't your typical who's the strongest list. We're talking about who can fit into your team in multiple ways, who can bring the most value, and who's been all the rage in the current meta. Some characters may not be the top pick for damage output, but they might be a game changer when it comes to supporting your team or just making things run smoother. So sit back, relax, and let's talk about which characters are worth your time and your precious Primogems. I'm quickly moving on to the video, and I'm ranking characters in Genshin Impact before we start. If you enjoy these types of tier list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching.
My friends, only 0.1% of viewers subscribe. If you like this type of content, please do not forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you in advance for your support.
The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Razor, Dehya, Xinyan, Aloy, Xinyan, Traveler Geo, Amber, Traveler Anemo, Traveler Hydro, Noelle, Chongyun, Lisa, and Xinyan. Alright, let's talk about some of the D-tier characters in Genshin Impact today. These characters aren't necessarily bad, but they do have some big hurdles to overcome if you want to get the most out of them. And trust me, I know we all have that one character we just really want to work, but sometimes the numbers don't lie. So, buckle up, we're diving into the nitty-gritty of some characters that could use a bit more love, or a lot more buffs. First up, we have Razor. Now, he's not bad, right? His elemental burst offers some nice electro damage and helps with consistent superconduct coverage, but he does get overshadowed by other characters when it comes to damage output. He's stuck in that weird middle ground where his electro and physical damage mix isn't as strong as we'd like it to be, especially compared to some of the other heavy hitters. If you're running him, you're probably going to need a lot of buffs just to make him shine. Then there's Dehya. She could be awesome, but there are a few too many hurdles here. Her elemental skill and burst just don't deal enough damage unless you've stacked multiple buffs, and even then, she's a bit too reliant on energy to bring her elemental burst back up. Her performance really peaks at higher constellations, which means you're stuck with a lower tier version unless you've put in a lot of time and resources. So unless you've got a constellation wishlist, Dehya might not be your go-to. Let's talk about Xinyan, or more specifically, her elemental burst. Sure, it can work as a decent nuke for physical builds, but here's the issue. Her scaling as a main DPS is kinda split between ATK and DF. This means you're making some tough choices to optimize her, but ultimately, her performance is going to feel little lacking compared to others in the same role. If you don't manage her build just right, she might fall short on damage. A solid character, but not the easiest to make work. Now, Aloy is one of those characters that really shines with the right setup, but that's the problem. To get the best out of her, you need to hit her bomblets with the pellets to infuse her attacks. Without access to constellations, her performance is just locked at a certain point, and you won't see those big jumps that make other characters feel amazing. If you're looking for a flexible DPS, Aloy might feel a bit underwhelming, especially if you're not able to invest in her constellations. Let's swing back to Xinyan for a second. Yes, again. This time, her elemental skill can apply pyro damage over time, which is decent for triggering reactions like Burgeon, but the application feels a bit inconsistent, and honestly, without that C2 to guarantee a crit hit on her elemental burst, she doesn't really stand out. She's fine for quick swap builds, but she just doesn't offer enough utility in a team comp to push her beyond the D tier. Traveler Geo definitely has a lot of potential, with solid elemental skill damage and the ability to block enemies with both their elemental skill and burst. They bring some nice utility to the table. And the C4, which increases elemental burst recharge rate, is a pretty sweet bonus. But when you compare the Traveler to other Geo characters, their overall damage and support just don't compete at the highest levels. You're getting some good utility, but you need to work harder to make them stand out. Let's not forget the Traveler Anemo. While their crowd control potential with elemental skill and burst is solid, they still feel a bit meh overall. There are other Anemo characters that provide more consistent damage and better buffs for your team, so the Traveler doesn't exactly feel irreplaceable. They can help with swarming enemies, but don't expect them to carry a fight by themselves. And last, but certainly not least, Noelle. She's a shield and a healer in one, but here's the catch. Her healing only works when her shield is active, and you have to be on field to make it happen. Her elemental skill also has a high cooldown, meaning you're stuck waiting for her to provide her healing and a defense. She's useful in niche situations, but you're better off with a character who can heal or shield without all those restrictions. So there you have it, some of the D tier characters that can be fun to play around with, but don't quite make the cut when it comes to top tier performance. If you're a fan of these characters, don't let me discourage you from using them, but if you're looking for some serious power, you might want to consider other options. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Yanfei, Heizu, Klee, Kave, Kokomi, Fremenette, Ningguang, Kachina, Kaeya, Dehya, Lisa, Chongyun, Sayu, Kiki, Barbara, Traveler Electro, Rosaria, Candice, and Dory. Alright, let's dive into the world of Genshin Impact and talk about some of the characters who might not be top tier, but still bring their own charm to the game. If you're looking for fun characters to play with, these picks can still be enjoyable, even if they're a bit lower on the tier list. Let's talk about the C tier characters and see what makes them tick. First up, we've got Yanfei. Now, she's got some solid pyro damage potential with her normal and charged attacks. However, her damage scaling is what you'd expect from a regular 4-star character. If you're playing her, you're going to want to be mindful of her stamina consumption, though her C1 constellation does help make things a bit easier. Not the top damage dealer, but she can still hold her own with the right setup. Then there's Heizu. If you're all about swell reactions or crit damage, he might be your guy. He's super fun as a burst damage dealer or as a driver for the Viridescent Venera set, but don't expect him to be doing massive damage outside of that. His elemental skill can dish out some serious damage when you manage to land those swells, but overall, his numbers don't quite keep up with some of the more high-powered characters out there. Next, we've got Klee, who's all about her normal and charged attacks. She's great at clearing out enemies, no doubt, but her playstyle is a little clunky, and it's not for everyone. If you're into min-maxing rotations to get the most out of her, she can be a blast. Just be prepared to put in the effort to optimize her performance. Now let's talk about Kave. He's a solid Dendro driver, especially in Bloom teams. His ability to buff your reactions can make a difference, but his personal damage output leaves a lot to be desired. If you've got a team focused on Dendro reactions though, he can be a helpful support character to have around. On the support side, we have Kokomi. She's great for Hydro reactions like Burgeon or Electrocharged, and her self-healing makes her pretty self-sufficient. But here's the catch, her kit doesn't allow her to crit, which means you'll need to rely on your team to cover that damage. It's not impossible to make her work, but she does require a bit more effort when it comes to team composition. Fremenette is an interesting one. He can be built as a cryo or physical DPS depending on how you want to play him. However, as a 4-star, his stats aren't quite up to par with the top tier Deeps characters. He can still be fun, especially if you're working with specific team comps, but you might feel the difference when compared to higher rarity units. Then there's Ningguang, a solid Geo DPS who uses her normal and charged attacks to deal damage. The only downside, she requires a pretty hefty investment in constellations to really shine. If you're not willing to dump resources into her, she can still be good, but she won't reach her full potential without those extra buffs. Finally, we've got Kachina, a character with okay off-field damage and some decent utility. She can even equip the Scroll of the Hero of Cinder City, which is a strong artifact set specific to Natlan units. But overall, her usefulness is a little situational, and she's not going to be the centerpiece of your team. Still, if you're looking for some added versatility, she can be fun to play around with. So there you have it, a quick look at some of the C-tier characters in Genshin Impact. They might not be the absolute best, but with the right team comp and a little love, they can still have their moment in the spotlight. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Yoimiya, Cephos, Ito, Sino, K-King, Ederson, Anoslu, Haz, Sasisihios, Eula, Albedo, Ayato, Kokomi, Traveler Pyro, Toma, Traveler Dendro, Lynette, Zhongli, Goru, Kirara, Mika, Sigawinna, Sayu, Toma, and Dehya. Alright, let's dive into the world of Genshin Impact's B-tier characters. These guys may not be the absolute top dogs in the game, but they've got a lot of potential if you know how to play them right. Think of them as the solid all-rounders or the characters that need a little extra attention to truly shine. Take Yoimiya, for example. She's got this incredible scaling on her pyro-infused normal attacks. It's a firecracker performance if you're lucky enough to get her uninterrupted. But the catch? You'll need some support characters to keep her going, things like improving her resistance to interruptions and boosting her attack speed. Without that, she's a little too vulnerable, and that's where she'll need the help. Then there's Cephos, who really gives you options when it comes to playstyle. Want to go all in with those charged attacks? Go ahead. Or maybe you're more of a normal attack spammer? He can do that too, especially with his elemental burst. But don't get too cocky, his charged attack form makes him a sitting duck for interruptions. Plus, he's a 4-star, so his stats won't blow you away. Now let's talk about Itto. He's got a great damage ceiling with his charged attacks and elemental skills, especially when his burst kicks in. But, of course, it's all about managing energy. Once his elemental burst is spent, his damage output takes a hit. Plus, you'll need to invest heavily in his artifacts and weapons to make him hit those top tier numbers. It's a bit of a grind, but it's rewarding when it clicks. Cyno might just be your go-to guy if you're into Dendro reactions like Aggravate and Hyper Bloom. He's a solid electro hyper carry, but his damage really takes off only when his elemental burst is active. Trouble is, the second you swap him out, that damage drops, and with his lack of interruption resistance, he can be tricky to keep at peak performance. Timing is everything with him. Ketching is another character who found her groove thanks to the recent introduction of the Dendro element. She's great for both aggravate or physical builds, which makes her pretty competitive. But you'll need to play her right to make her really shine. It's all about hitting those reactions and building the right synergy with your team. Noelle's an interesting one. She's got this great balance between 80k and DAF, which makes her a solid option for sustained damage. The kicker is her C6. When you get there, her performance really spikes. She's a bit of a hidden gem in the right hands, especially for those looking for a self-sufficient character who can both shield and heal. Eula's another character with a high skill ceiling. Her elemental burst is a huge part of her damage output, especially if she can trigger superconduct on enemies. But here's the thing, if that burst doesn't crit or land properly, a lot of her potential damage is gone. She's all about hitting those crucial moments, and when it works, it really works. But timing and investment are key. So there you have it, a deep dive into Genshin's B tier characters. These guys might not be the best of the best, but with the right build and team synergy, they can absolutely hold their own. What do you think? Any of these characters you're ready to invest in? Let me know in the comments. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Xiao, Gaming, Ayaka, Tartaglia, Diluc, Ayato, Tignari, Wanderer, Ganyu, Venti, Ganyu, Mona, Beidou, Collei, Rosaria, Sucrose, Faruz Ian, Venti, Diona, Lancy Ian, Yunjin, Yao Yao, Golustse, Layla, Shinobu, and Sarah. Alright, let's talk about some of Genshin Impact's strongest A tier characters, and trust me, these guys are the go-to for those who want to build a solid team. They're not necessarily the absolute best of the best, but they're still up there, packing a serious punch. Let's start with Xiao. This guy is a high-risk, high-reward character. His elemental burst boosts his DPS, but the catch is that it costs him some HP. You'll want to have supports around to keep him alive and really maximize his potential. Then we've got Gaming, who might surprise you as a 4-star character, especially at C6. His plunging damage is no joke when you've got him on the right team, though he's heavily reliant on using his elemental burst off cooldown to keep the damage flowing. Not as flashy as some others, but definitely a solid pick if you've got the right setup. Next up, Ayaka. She's got one of the smoothest cryo infusions in the game. Sprint around and bam, your normal and charged attacks are infused with cryo almost permanently. Her elemental burst is her bread and butter, and with the right investment she can absolutely compete with the top tier DPS units. But don't get too excited, she's a bit of a luxury pick because she requires a lot of investment to truly shine. Let's talk about Tartaglia now. This Hydro powerhouse is currently the best driver for the Vaporize reaction. His Riptide makes him amazing against multiple enemies, and if you're running Vaporize teams, he's going to be a game changer. Just be aware, his playstyle isn't for the faint of heart. It requires some skillful switching between his ranged and melee modes. Diluc is up next, and he's still a beast even with all the new characters. His gameplay revolves around weaving normal attacks and elemental skills to deal tons of damage. His elemental burst is low cost and wide-reaching, making him ideal for quick burst damage. That being said, his burst can push lighter enemies around, which might not always be ideal, but hey, it's Diluc, he's still top tier. And let's not forget Ayato, who's pretty solid for Hydro-based teams. His elemental skill gives him Hydro-infused normal attacks with continuous damage, and his elemental burst is great for self-buffing. He can also act as a hydro driver for elemental reactions, so he's a great all-rounder, though like many, he thrives when paired with the right support characters. Now, let's talk about Tignari, one of the best Dendro characters for damage. His charged attacks and elemental burst hit hard, and he's perfect for triggering the spread Dendro reaction. His ability to distract enemies with his taunt is also pretty handy. He's got a unique kit that requires a bit of finesse to truly excel, but when you get it right, the damage potential is insane. Last but definitely not least, Wanderer. His normal attacks are fantastic for AoE damage and can even home in on enemies, making him a solid choice for large mobs. He does require a bit of support, especially at lower constellations, but once you have him fully built, he's one of the most fun and mobile characters to play in Genshin Impact. These A-tier characters all have their strengths, and while they might not have the raw power of the S-tier characters, they still hold their own and can be the backbone of any strong team. So, if you've got any of these guys, congratulations, you've got some real heavy hitters at your disposal. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Mualani, Kinich, Navia, Al-Haytham, Hu Tao, Laini, Chaska, Raiden, Raya Fesli, Chlorinende, Nilu, Fischl, Yae Miko, Shinobu, Emily, Chiori, Ororon, Chevruz, Beiju, Kokomi, Raiden, Xianyun, Mona, Shenhe, Jean, and Sucrose. Alright, let's dive into some of the absolute powerhouses in Genshin Impact. We're talking about those S-tier characters that can turn any fight into a walk in the park, or a giant explosion of chaos, depending on your playstyle. And let me tell you, these characters, they're the ones that make you feel like an unstoppable force of nature when you put them on your team. So grab your favorite snack and let's get into it. First up, we've got Mualani. If you're looking for someone who brings the pain quickly, Mualani is your go-to. This character does amazing front-loaded damage, both single target and AoE, though she does need a little setup to really hit her stride. If you're looking for exploration as well, Mualani is solid, especially in vaporized teams. Just be mindful of Sharky's bite though, because that attack can occasionally miss if you're not careful. Still, her potential is massive. Then there's Kinich, the king of burning and burgeon teams. He's perfect for those high-octane, single-target battles, and his grappling hook is a dream for exploration. It's a little tricky to use in combat on uneven surfaces, but hey, we can't all be perfect, right? If Kinich isn't part of a burning or burgeon team, he loses some of his luster, especially in terms of Night Soul points. But once he's in the right team, he's an absolute beast. Navia's got one of the highest front-loaded elemental skill damages in the game. Seriously, she can take down medium-level opponents in a heartbeat and chunk bosses like it's nothing. What's even better? She's not locked into mono-geo teams, so you've got a ton of flexibility. But, like with many powerful characters, her front-loaded damage is kind of a double-edged sword. It's awesome at first, but you might find the damage over time lacking if you're in a longer battle. Next, we've got Al-Haytham, the king of Dendro application. Al-Haytham can trigger all those insane reactions like Hyper Bloom, Burgeon, and Shred with ease. He's got excellent AoE damage, and the best part, he doesn't need a ton of investment to perform at a high level. Whether you're facing a horde of enemies or a tough boss, Al-Haytham makes everything look easy, and that's what we love to see. Hu Tao, man, where do I even start? If you're into big single target pyro damage, she is chef's kiss. Her elemental skill lets you deal massive damage with her normal and charged attacks, but at the cost of sacrificing some HP. However, once you hit C1, you can spam those charged attacks without worrying about stamina, and that's when Hu Tao really shines. If you haven't experienced her power yet, what are you even doing? Laini is another fantastic pick, especially if you're all about that balance between single target and AoE damage. Her passive talent compensates for the lack of elemental reactions in mono-pyro teams, so you don't have to worry too much about building around her. But let's be real, she's super susceptible to interruptions, so you've got to keep her safe while she's dealing all that damage. Chaska is another versatile character that excels in rainbow teams, where she can convert her damage into any element: pyro, hydro, electro, or cryo. She's incredibly flexible in team building and can fly, which is a game changer when you're exploring Natlan. However, her AoE attacks tend to split between enemies, so if you're hoping for massive AoE damage, Chaska's better suited for single target fights. Finally, we've got Raiden, who is absolutely bonkers in terms of damage output. Her burst allows her to be on the field and dish out insane amounts of damage in just 7 seconds. Her C2 unlocks DF Ignore, making her an unstoppable force. If you want someone who can obliterate enemies in a flash, Raiden is definitely one of the top tier DPS characters. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Mualani, Kinich, Navia, Alhaitham, Hu Tao, Laini, Chaska, Raiden, Ryofuzli, Clorinde, Nilu, Fischl, Yai Miko, Shinobu, Emili, Chiori, Ororon, Chevruz, Baiju, Kokomi, Raiden, Xianyun, Mona, Shenhe, Jean, and Sucrose. Alright, let's dive into some of the absolute powerhouses in Genshin Impact. We're talking about those S-tier characters that can turn any fight into a walk in the park, or a giant explosion of chaos, depending on your playstyle. And let me tell you, these characters, they're the ones that make you feel like an unstoppable force of nature when you put them on your team. So grab your favorite snack and let's get into it. First up, we've got Mualani. If you're looking for someone who brings the pain quickly, Mualani is your go-to. This character does amazing front-loaded damage, both single target and AoE, though she does need a little setup to really hit her stride. If you're looking for exploration as well, Mualani is solid, especially in vaporized teams. Just be mindful of Sharky's bite though, because that attack can occasionally miss if you're not careful. Still, her potential is massive. Then there's Kinich, the king of burning and Burgeon teams. He's perfect for those high-octane, single-target battles, and his grappling hook is a dream for exploration. It's a little tricky to use in combat on uneven surfaces, but hey, we can't all be perfect, right? If Kinich isn't part of a burning or Burgeon team, he loses some of his luster, especially in terms of Night Soul points, but once he's in the right team, he's an absolute beast. Navia's got one of the highest front-loaded elemental skill damages in the game. Seriously, she can take down medium-level opponents in a heartbeat and chunk bosses like it's nothing. What's even better, she's not locked into mono-geo teams, so you've got a ton of flexibility. But, like with many powerful characters, her front-loaded damage is kind of a double-edged sword. It's awesome at first, but you might find the damage over time lacking if you're in a longer battle. Next, we've got Alhaitham, the king of Dendro application. Alhaitham can trigger all those insane reactions like Hyper Bloom, Burgeon, and Spread with ease. He's got excellent AoE damage, and the best part? He doesn't need a ton of investment to perform at a high level. Whether you're facing a horde of enemies or a tough boss, Alhaitham makes everything look easy, and that's what we love to see. Hu Tao, man, where do I even start? If you're into big single-target pyro damage, she is chef's kiss. Her elemental skill lets you deal massive damage with her normal and charge attacks, but at the cost of sacrificing some HP. However, once you hit C1, you can spam those charged attacks without worrying about stamina, and that's when Hu Tao really shines. If you haven't experienced her power yet, what are you even doing? Laini is another fantastic pick, especially if you're all about that balance between single target and AoE damage. Her passive talent compensates for the lack of elemental reactions in mono-pyro teams, so you don't have to worry too much about building around her. But, let's be real, she's super susceptible to interruptions, so you've got to keep her safe while she's dealing all that damage. Chaska is another versatile character that excels in rainbow teams, where she can convert her damage into any element. Pyro, Hydro, Electro, or Cryo. She's incredibly flexible in team building and can fly, which is a game changer when you're exploring Natlan. However, her AoE attacks tend to split between enemies, so if you're hoping for massive AoE damage, Chaska's better suited for single target Rahat sites. Finally, we've got Raiden, who is absolutely bonkers in terms of damage output. Her burst allows her to be on the field and dish out insane amounts of damage in just 7 seconds. Her C2 unlocks DEF Ignore, making her an unstoppable force. If you want someone who can obliterate enemies in a flash, Raiden is definitely one of the top tier DPS characters. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.